Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Welcome to our Ritual Night Talk for December 7th, 2021. I'm Scott Stenwick, your host for these Ritual Night Talk events, presented under the auspices of Leaping Laughter OTO in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So tonight, I'm going to be covering a topic that I can't believe I haven't previously covered, and that is how to start your daily magical practice. I mean, it's like this simple thing that you'd think, okay, well, you just get going and you do what? But I was fielding some questions on the blog this week and I realized, I put up an article or two about it, but I haven't actually made a video for it. And I look back and I'm like, really? I haven't made a video? I look back through the Facebook Live videos, but no, I haven't. I talk about it in a number of videos. I talk about it being important in a number of videos, but I never have actually done a standalone video about it. So tonight, this is that video. And before we get going, make sure you like, subscribe, request notifications so you will always see when we go live and or post videos here on the Leaping Laughter YouTube channel. I have also included the donation link in the description. All donations go to support the operations of Leaping Laughter OTO in Minneapolis, Minnesota. No donation is too small. Everything is appreciated. So with that, I'm going to get going on starting your daily magical practice. And I want to start off with a little bit of a caveat, with a little bit of a sidebar, which is if you've ever studied the works of Krishnamurti, I don't know if you're familiar with him at all. Krishnamurti was a boy from India who was raised from a very young age to be the messiah of theosophy by the Theosophical Society, which was this wealthy, powerful, esoteric group in the late 1800s, early 1900s. There are still theosophical groups around today. I'm not really sure how significant, big, powerful, or whatever they are, but certainly in that period, from like the late 1800s up until about the 1920s, they were a pretty serious religious movement. They were one of the first groups to try and bring together Eastern and Western teachings to greater or lesser effect, depending on kind of how they put things together. But anyway, here's the point. So Krishnamurti eventually got completely disillusioned with this, and he's like, no, I'm not going to do this, and I'm basically going to quit as your messiah, okay? And so he went off, and then he wrote a bunch of books talking about things like esotericism and philosophy and stuff. And one of the great things about Krishnamurti is that he's really, really good at telling you, no, you need to trust yourself, don't believe what these gurus are telling you, and all this kind of stuff about, basically something that as a Thelemite, I would be like, be true to your will, right? And so it's very much in harmony with that sort of a thing. But where it kind of is lacking, in my opinion, and it could be that I haven't read enough or something like that. I've read a few things of his, and I'm just using this as an example. If from the standpoint of, you need to trust yourself and so forth and this kind of a thing, it's like, well, that's great, but let's say you want to do spiritual practice and have it be effective. What do you do? And that's where I think it kind of falls short. And in the sense that, and in the New Age community, and to some extent has picked up this too. There's a whole lot of different New Age beliefs that, kind of overlap, and a lot of things that are kind of like esotericism. There are a lot of ideas in the New Age that come from magic, but there isn't really a straightforward way to sit down and say, all right, you're going to practice magic. This is what you do on a daily basis to get good at magic. And so that's what I'm trying to lay out here. What those practices are and, how you should go about doing them. And, really making the point that this is one of the essential things about getting good at magic. There are a few books that I've seen, people who ascribe to more like the spirit-only model of magic where, well, the spirits do the work, so we don't need to. That's not how all magic works. You certainly can do magic with spirits, if you haven't necessarily built up a lot of power. There's a lot of variables. But the thing is that the most powerful magic you can possibly do is a combination of your power and the power of a spirit or spirits welded together into a single operation. So in that sense, you have, if you will, a sort of theurgic aspect to it, which is building yourself up as a magician, building your power, facilitating your mystical experience, cultivating union with the divine source, the dynamic ground of being, whatever you want to call that. Maybe you just want to call it God. I mean, it's all really kind of the same stuff. This field of consciousness, it permeates the universe, and it's the ground for everything that we experience and so forth. And it's also what we work with extensively when we do spells and rituals. I did a video at one point talking about how Crowley is, magic is the science and art of causing change in conformity with will, and Dion Fortune's model of magic is the science of art of causing change in consciousness in conformity with will, and how really when you break it down, they're the same thing, because a properly done, successful magical operation is at its absolute base a series of states of consciousness activated in a particular order that may or may not communicate with other consciousnesses that are drawn in to do the work. Okay, so that is the most fundamental thing about magic, and that's how we do it. Okay, so how do you get good at that? Because, right, it sounds huge, right? And it sounds like the sort of thing, oh, well, maybe you have to go to a monastery and, spend all this time in contemplation or whatnot. But actually, no, you don't. And the Western esoteric tradition, is a tradition that is really designed to be practiced by people living out in the world. It always has been. It may have been early on, some of the grimoires were developed, specifically for clergy, like you see, for example, they have Tamarin, I believe. There's a point where you're supposed to say Mass and things like that. It's pretty clear that it's set up for clergy people. But certainly by the time we get into the Renaissance, the people who played around with magic were basically people living ordinary lives, playing around with magic, trying to figure out how it worked, trying to figure out what it did, and whatever, to the degree that they could leverage, scientific processes and so on for it. And, that was a thing that was done, sometimes you saw stuff that was kind of scientific. A lot of the time you really didn't. A lot of it was seen more like folklore and so forth. But certainly by the time we get around to Thelema and Aleister Crowley, in my opinion, his big contribution with magic was to try and sit down and apply the scientific method as best you can to these processes to see what's going on, and not look at them as, I got to prove it exists or not exists. That's a trap parapsychology fell into, and that talked about that in a previous video. The thing is that you want to look at what these things are, explore them, and then you can find out what they do. Okay? And one of the basics of that is that with some of these rituals that have been practiced for a long time, the idea is that, the student practices a ritual and the student receives a result. Crowley makes a point in Liber O where he's talking about, the rituals of the pentagram and hexagram, which I will mention a little bit later in this video. Where he says, the contents of this book are, easy to misunderstand. It is important to, not subscribe any, we speak of things that may or may not exist, and it's important not to subscribe any objective or philosophical validity to them. And that is true in an a priori sense. I would say that once you do these things and you experience these things, it's hard to think that, this thing that causes a probability shift in the exterior world somehow isn't real, right? That is pretty straightforward. But you really want to put yourself in this position of, I'm a scientist walking into a laboratory doing this stuff. I don't know whether it works or not. The hypothesis I'm being given is I'm being told I do these things and I'll get some results. So what I'm going to do is, rather than trying to prejudge anything, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to do these practices, according to the instructions I'm given. I'm going to do them for a period of time, and I'm going to see what the results are. Okay? So that's the perspective you should have going into it. There has been some stuff back and forth with talking about Crowley's idea of the initiated interpretation of ceremonial magic, which is where basically Crowley didn't believe in praeter-human intelligences until he met one, in 1904, and the initiated interpretation of ceremonial magic was written earlier than that. But the thing is that you want to be in a position where you're open-minded about things. You don't want to be doubting what you're doing, but you also don't want to be if this doesn't do the most amazing thing, I'm just going to abandon it because it's worthless. You don't want to have that attitude either. And I think that's kind of where the Book of the Law talks about lust of result. If you're just like, oh, but if it doesn't work immediately and do everything I want, I'm going to abandon it. Well, that's kind of a problem, right? You don't want to be that person. You have to be willing to devote some amount of time to this. Now, the good news, though, is that really, if you streamline your practices, you don't have to devote an enormous amount of time to it. My basic daily practices, you meditate. That a meditation session takes about 20 minutes. Ceremonial practices I do take, less than 10. So, you could sit down and do your, full practice, in the course of a day in a half an hour. Okay. And, a lot of people, spend, more than an hour a day watching television. It's not like, and not to say that television's bad. I enjoy film and television as well, particularly if it's well done. But the thing is that, this is something that you can incorporate into your life. You could put aside a half an hour a day to practice magic if you want to get good at magic. And it is interesting because so few people do it in my experience, or at least they don't do it regularly. And it's interesting because somebody who is doing this can maybe be doing magic for like a year or two. And you do these practices and you're more stable, you're more solid than somebody who's, oh, well, I've been studying for, thus and such years and I've taken thus and such class and, all this kind of stuff. But the thing is, if they aren't sitting down and doing the daily practice, you're getting better way faster than they are. And let me add one other little caveat there, which is that it is, while it is true up to a point that in terms of daily practice, the more you do, the faster you go, you also have to understand that you may find points in your life where going as fast as you possibly can isn't what you want to do. It is not necessarily unreasonable to back off on some of these practices, but you have to understand when you do that, you are slowing your progress down. Now, it gives you a tool if you want to slow your progress down to do it deliberately. Start doing, don't do the practice every day, maybe do it every other day or something like that. And that allows you to back off and slow things down, but continue moving forward. And so that can be a useful thing as well. You don't want to let it turn into a competition. And the other thing you don't want to do is you don't want to let it turn into this thing where, I did this and it works great, so I'm going to do more and it's going to work better. You may not want to do that. And the reason that you may not want to do that is because we're trying to calibrate practices, right? For stuff that, people are actually going to do, that people aren't going to burn out, that people aren't going to have, negative consequences from. There's an article. You can find it online. It's called The Dark Side of Mindfulness. I mentioned it a number of times. I teach mindfulness meditation because it's simple and it works about as well as other schools of meditation. Okay, and I'm going to talk about how to do that in a minute here. But one of the things to keep in mind is that there are people who have some problems with mindfulness meditation. And one of the commonalities that I found when I was looking over some of these histories, reading over this article, there are people who they decide, I do it for 20 minutes and it feels great, so I'm going to do it as much as I can. They get up doing like hours and hours a day, and then they start feeling depressed and they start feeling like these things are going on. It's like, it's kind of important to do the amount you're going to do. And, I know in America especially, our culture is very much, this is good, more is better, right? Not necessarily when you're dealing with something as subtle as magic. There's another example I talked about in an article on my blog. Guy, James Arthur Ray. He was one of those secret New Age teachers. And he did sweat lodges. He said, my sweat lodges aren't for wussies. And he would turn up the temperature deliberately past what you would see in, any, sweat lodge that you would go to, like a traditional one that was being administered in the traditional way. And guess what? A couple of people died. Okay. And so not only was the sweat lodge turned up to the point where people died, it was, people were geared up, I've got to tough this out. So if they started feeling bad, they didn't leave the sweat lodge. And a couple of those people died. And, he faced a lawsuit and there was this whole kind of thing. More is not necessarily better. When dealing with these techniques, as I say, they are calibrated to work a certain way. And so if you decide, I'm going to do this and do this and do this and do this, either maybe to show off to somebody, to try and impress a teacher. I have had a couple of students who tried to impress. Well, you said do this much asana practice. They do it for 10 minutes. And I went and did it for, an hour and a half because, I'm going to show how, cool I am. And it's like, well, that was a while ago when I was starting out as a teacher, I was impressed like that by that. I'm like, wow, you're really hardcore. Every time somebody like that does it, though, they literally burn out within like a month and they just quit doing it. And it seems like it's just this repeatable pattern. Okay, so don't try to push yourself to do a ridiculous amount of work when you're doing magic. I think I've mentioned this several times on other videos, but the Golden Dawn had this thing where you joined it and they were talking, well, the minimum amount of work to complete the grades. And Crowley thought that was just terrible. He's like, what do you mean the minimum amount of work? You should give your all to the spiritual path and this kind of stuff. And so that may be true philosophically, okay? But it also is true that if you push yourself beyond kind of, the specified limits of the practice, often you're going to run into problems. And I don't mean a demon is going to come out of the wall and eat your face or something like that. What's probably going to happen is, well, you could get depressed. You could just, burn out and decide you don't want to do magic anymore. It's going to be something like that. Okay. It's not like, that's the horror movie model of man, like you say like one word wrong and monsters eat you is absolutely not a real thing. So the first thing that I recommend for people starting out a daily magical practice is to practice mindfulness meditation. Okay, mindfulness meditation is really simple. What you want to do is you want to find a place to sit. You can sit cross-legged, you can sit in a chair. You just want to keep your spine straight. You want to touch your tongue to the roof of your mouth, like that. You want to inhale and exhale through your nose if you can. Although when I started doing this, I touched my tongue and breathed through my mouth. I had a very serious sinus condition, which has since been corrected by many, many years ago. That was corrected by surgery. And so now I can inhale and exhale through the nose. This did work back before I could do that, though. So I just want to point that out. If you got a stuffy nose, you could still do this. Just, tongue to the roof of your mouth and just, breathe through your mouth. But make sure the tongue touches. That's important. And then the next thing you're going to do is you are going to pay attention to your breath. You're going to breathe slowly and evenly from your diaphragm. And you're just going to focus your attention on your breath. And you are going to observe any thoughts that come up. Okay? Sounds pretty easy, right? Well, okay, it's easier than a lot of people make it sound. So what's going to happen is thoughts are going to come up and you're going to get distracted. And so this is always going to happen. And I have talked to people who are like, oh, I can't meditate. I get distracted too easily. Like the idea that if your mind wanders during meditation, that means you're failing at it or something. That's totally not true. I had a meditation teacher, again, many years ago who students come to me and they ask if they're succeeding in their meditation practice. And I ask them, are you doing your meditation practice? If they say yes, then I say, then you are succeeding at your meditation practice, okay? The point of meditation is not to sit there and stop all your thoughts. You're not trying to force everything. And it is easy to get that impression from some writers, including Crowley, that that's what you're supposed to do. But for this basic level of meditation, we're not talking about some of the higher levels of meditation where you're doing things like cultivating this absolute single pointedness of will, on an object or anything like that. You're paying attention to your breath and you're observing your thoughts, okay, for a specified period of time. Your mind's going to wander. When you notice your mind wandered, and dismiss the thought as best you can, come back to the breath. Mind wanders, back to the breath. Mind wanders, back to the breath. Okay? And again, not a competition. People's psychologies are different. Some people are going to sit down to do this and their mind's going to wander hundreds of times. Some people are going to sit down, maybe their mind wanders 20 or 30 times. Neither is better or worse than the other. The point is that you're doing it and you're acclimatizing your mind to this state where you are observing your thoughts. Okay? And so you want to think about it. Meditation is not a thought stopping practice. It's like a thought relaxing practice. Okay? If you think of it that way, I think that's maybe a little bit clearer in the sense that as you do meditation on a daily basis, and you do this over and over again, and you cultivate this, you cultivate back to the breath, you cultivate back to the breath, And so, and as you do that, what's going to happen is slowly your mind is going to start wandering less. And eventually, after you've done it a long time, it's maybe only wander a few times in a practice session, or perhaps not at all, although usually you get one or two, even in a really good session. Okay, but the thing is that it's not something that you're forcing your mind to do. You're not forcing yourself not to think about anything. That is a recipe for failure. And I think that that's this idea that people get from, reading some of these books and stuff that, oh, meditation, I'm supposed to stop my thoughts. Well, you're supposed to relax your thoughts and your digressions will slowly subside. But naturally, this is like, way of the Tao kind of stuff. It's a thing that you let happen. It's not a thing that you make happen. Okay? And I recommend meditating for 20-minute session at least once a day. If you want to do 20 minutes twice a day, you can, but that's all you should do. And feel free to do one session, especially when you're starting out. I generally do not do multiple sessions in a day. I will do like a 20-minute session, and that's fine as far as I'm concerned with the practices that I do. But you could do 2. Don't do more than that, though. You don't want to be getting into meditating for like an hour or more a day. That's where some of the dark side of meditation stuff comes in. The other thing is if you find that as you meditate, some dark or depressive kind of feelings are coming up, you probably want to take a break from meditating. Okay? Just relax your mind. Maybe sit where you're sitting, to complete the session, but don't even worry about what your thoughts are doing. Meditating through depressive thoughts rarely works. And what's more likely to happen is you'll wind up, kind of getting those depressive thoughts kind of coded into your memories of the meditation. And I think that's where some people have problems with it. And if you find that, your meditation, every time you sit down to meditate, some of these things come up. If you stop doing it for a while and come back to it, you'll usually find that will subside. If it doesn't, you may need to talk to somebody who's a more experienced meditation teacher. And that's the other thing. I mean, if you, get interested in something like Buddhism and you want to go on like a Zen retreat or something like that, where you're going to be meditating, for like hours and hours a day or something like that, that's really not the kind of thing I'm talking about that you shouldn't be doing. There, you would be studying, with a meditation teacher who presumably is very experienced at that. And if you have any negative issues, you can go to them and, they can probably give you a remedy for it. I'm specifically talking about when you're practicing on your own and you don't have a resource like that to go to. Okay? So that's the first level 1 is meditate. Do 20 minutes of mindfulness meditation every day. Next thing you do, you can add some ceremonial work to it. First ritual, we usually teach people at the ritual workshop and elsewhere, is the lesser ritual, the pentagram. There is nothing lesser or insignificant about it. I'm probably going to do a reprise here on YouTube of my video on the lesser ritual, the pentagram, that I did over on Facebook Live. So I'm not going to go into a lot of details about how you do it, but it's a simple ceremonial ritual, and you can add that to your practice. How a lot of people will do it is it has 2 forms. It has a banishing form and an invoking form. And if you do the invoking form when you get up in the morning, and you do the banishing form before you go to bed at night, that's a good ceremonial practice. And then you can put your meditation session anywhere you want. You can make that separate from your ceremonial practice, or you could do your pentagram ritual and then follow it with your meditation practice. So that's like level 2. Okay? So, and if you're doing that, that's a pretty solid practice. The next practice that you do is, in this sequence, would be, you can add this practice called the middle pillar. And also, I will add, these are kind of more the generic, kind of they are thelemic rituals in that I look at Crowley's versions of it. The middle pillar is actually a Regardie ritual, so it's, used by the Golden Dawn, used a bunch of places. Regardie was Crowley's secretary. He also was a Golden Dawn initiate. And so the middle pillar ritual is a ritual where what you're doing is you're working with your bodily energies. So you're pulling the energies of the Sephiroth, of the Tree of Life, on the middle pillar down through your aura, from the top of your head to your feet. and you vibrate the God names at the different points. You can visualize them in different colors. And they're the God names that correspond to the Sephiroth on the Tree of Life. So you've got Kether, Da'ath, which is actually not a Sephiroth. It's more of a point related to the Abyss. Then Tifereth, Yesod, and Malkut down the tree. And the idea is so it's like working with the spiritual channel in Qigong. If you do practice Qigong, that's another thing that's cool to do. And I do a video someplace about energy work talking about that. I actually do study Qigong. And so, I'll do the middle pillar, but then when I do my energy circulation, I do more of a Qigong style thing. And that's what I tend to teach people. Again, going to do a video on that one and talk about it. But the idea then, okay, so what you're doing is you're doing your banishing pentagram ritual before you go to bed. You're invoking pentagram ritual when you get up in the morning. Your meditations and your meditation session. You can follow your pentagram rituals with the middle pillar. And as you're doing that, and what we're doing here is really pretty similar to what you're going to find in, if you went and joined, a group like Golden Dawn or Golden Dawn Inspired, they're going to teach you something kind of like this. It's going to be pretty similar. Now, the big difference in what I teach is this next piece. So once you get that down, you've got your lesser ritual, the pentagram down, banishing and invoking form, you've got your middle pillar down, and you're doing your meditation. Okay, I add the lesser invoking ritual of the hexagram combined with the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram for a single practice session in a day. You can do two of them if you want, but I do one of them. The reason that we do two with the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram and lesser invoking ritual of the pentagram is if that's the only ritual that you want to be doing both your banishing and your invoking form in the course of a day, because you don't want to sit there and just banish. Some groups will tell you, spend like 2 years banishing and then you can do magic. It's like, you're not going to make a lot of progress doing that. Get the banishing down, get the invoking down, start banishing and invoking on a daily basis. And then, you can move forward spiritually. Whereas if you're banishing, you're really just going to sit kind of stay where you are. Banishing will make your mind clear. It'll make stuff in your life kind of calm. It can deal with things like spirits, although there are better ways to deal with spirits. Spirits often will run away if they see you do something like the lesser pentagram. But when you add in the lesser invoking ritual of the pentagram, you wind up with a practice sequence that looks like this. So you're doing your lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, your lesser invoking ritual of the hexagram, your middle pillar, and if you want to combine it, your meditation session. And then you close with the Kabbalistic cross, which is the opening step of the lesser ritual of the pentagram. Once you do that, you can just do the banishing form of the pentagram because you're doing the invoking hexagram. So again, you're banishing and you're invoking. So you're doing both of those, but now you're doing it in one step. And combining the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram and lesser invoking ritual of the hexagram creates something that I talk about that I call the operant field. And what I found is using those two rituals to open your operations, okay, they create a space or field in which consciousness translates more easily into physical reality. That is, it increases the probability shifts of the spells you can cast almost right away. If you're an experienced magician, you've never done this, I challenge you to try it. Flip it around. It feels a little weird the first couple times you do it. If you're doing like the traditional Golden Dawn, banishing pentagram, banishing hexagram, invoke up, banish down, that structure. See what happens when you use the lesser invoking ritual, the hexagram, instead. And I think you will find that the effects are interesting. Or at least you will if magic works for you the way it does for me, which is the one big caveat, which is, of course, that there are individual differences in terms of what works for individual magicians. So then what you're doing is you are banishing at the microcosmic level. That's your aura, that's your sphere of sensation. You're calming that down, and you're creating just a clear space. Into that clear space with the lesser invoking ritual of the hexagram, you are pulling in the macrocosmic elements of nature. So the microcosm and macrocosm interlock. So now when you do your middle pillar, you're pulling down your energy from the divine source. You're pulling down that energy from the macrocosmic divine source. You aren't just doing the middle pillar and just activating areas in your psyche or whatnot. You're pulling energy through that is macrocosmic, that is outside yourself. That is the energies of the elements of nature, and as you know, the elements are a foundational system. Then built on top of that is the system of the planets, then the system of the zodiac, and so on. That's how it all works. That pulls it all together. That kind of space, lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, lesser invoking ritual of the hexagram, and then you just close with the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram. You do not close with the lesser banishing ritual of the hexagram. That will increase the power of most of the magical stuff I've ever tried to do with it. Even if you just do those rituals and then you just go ahead and do, I don't know, chaos magic or hoodoo or, whatever it is you're going to do, it just works better in the space because it can partake of the space. There are also thelemic equivalents to those rituals. So in the thelemic system, you have the star ruby, which is the banishing pentagram ritual. You have the star sapphire, which is the invoking hexagram ritual. And you have the 11-fold seal from Liber Reguli, which behaves a lot like the middle pillar. You can also go ahead and, if you want to go ahead and go into doing the full Liber Reguli after that, that is then, it's like a greater invoking pentagram for Malkut, and that corresponds to the vision of the Holy Guardian Angel or of Adonai. So that's preparatory work for the knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel, which in the thelemic system you do with Liber Samek. And so all the stuff kind of fits together. If you want an equivalent to that, which is, or a corresponding ritual to that, you're going to find, people argue over what's more powerful and stuff like that. A ritual that corresponds to that in the sequence. So you would do lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, lesser invoking ritual of the hexagram, the middle pillar, and then the greater invoking ritual of the pentagram for Malkut, which is the one with the 4 elemental pentagrams, then meditation, then close with Kabbalistic cross. And so that would be how you would put that together. And that would be the same kind of thing, sort of, as star ruby, star sapphire, and then Reguli, which includes the 11-fold seal. And then finally, meditation, and then you can close that with the Kabbalistic cross from the star ruby. Your Kabbalistic cross should correspond to your opening pentagram ritual. Now, and a big thing to mention here is that talking about these rituals as lesser rituals, as though they're unimportant, is really not the case. They are lesser more in the sense that they are general and foundational. They are what you use to support your magical operation. They are not the magical operation itself. What you essentially are doing with those rituals is you're creating and visualizing and empowering an imaginary magic circle in which you are working. And, that is a technique that has been used to antiquity. You don't necessarily have to use a physical circle. Jake Stratton Kent notes in Geosophia that imaginary circles have been used going back thousands of years. And essentially, these rituals are a way of building a particularly potent imaginary circle in which we work. So if you think about that as a circle and the space and what you're building, that gives you a good idea of how these rituals fit together. And in the context of daily practice, the thing that you're building is you're building yourself. What you're doing is you are opening that circle, and then you're doing the middle pillar. You're aligning your consciousness with the divine, and hopefully cultivating mystical experiences that will lead to greater apprehension of the divine. So, in effect, you are approaching God is what you're doing with these rituals. And then, so you've pulled all this energy in, and now you're going to meditate, and you're going to sit with that energy. And just apply the simple, mindfulness meditation, back to the breath, back to the breath. You just apply that for the period of time. Get up, do your Kabbalistic cross, that seals in the practice, and you're done. Okay? If you want, you can add some sort of a statement. With my daily practice, I like to add, bring me to the accomplishment of the great work, the summum bonum, true wisdom, and perfect happiness, which is a modified line from the Gnostic Mass that we do in OTO. And so I particularly like that sentiment, so I put it into my daily practice like an affirmation, so that, the daily practice not only will build me up, but also it's building my life up. I want my life to go in harmony with my will. And trust me, you do. You might be in some situation where, I don't feel like this is my will, but I can't let go of it because, don't fall into that trap. Just do the practice. See what happens. Do the practice, get the results. Stuff in your life is going to change, but it's a good change. What's going to happen is, I have started doing some of these practices. I had a job that I didn't want to lose. I wound up losing the job. But a couple months later, I got a way better job. It's stuff like that. It's like once you're acting in harmony with your will, things in your life tend to work better. And I understand that people come at this from different stations in life, different degrees of difficulty, and so on. I am a relatively fortunate person from a relatively fortunate family, but I will say that I have seen this work for people. I've seen this work for students, rich and poor alike, and it's like stuff gets shook up, but usually it gets shook up for the best. But you got to keep doing the practice, and that is really the key. Okay, even if you want to slow it down, like I talked about, keep doing it every other day. The discipline of magic is not about pushing your physical limits beyond, what you can do. It's not about, enduring terrible things or pain or whatever. The discipline of magic is working the daily practice day in, day out. Even on days when you feel like, this isn't doing anything, that happens. It's called the dark night of the soul. You go through saying, this is pointless what I'm doing. Go through that. Keep doing that. You may want to, if it gets bad, you can drop your meditation session if it's something where the meditation session isn't working. Keep doing the ceremonial stuff though. And I think what you're going to find is that you're going to your life is going to change, and it may be uncomfortable at first, but it's a good kind of change. And where it's going to get you is eventually where you want to be, as long as you stick with it and are disciplined about it. That is the discipline of magic. Coming back to the circle day in, day out. And so I'm going to wrap that up. I'm going to wrap up here for tonight. Thank you all very much for tuning in and watching this video. Hopefully you got some useful tips out of it. Feel free to ask me questions, either here on YouTube or over on my blog, Algoides. I'm going to include a link in the description to the video that points to an article that I wrote up in my blog about daily practice that talks about some of these same ideas. And again, the donation link is always good. No donation is too small. All donations go to support the operations of Leaping Laughter OTO in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Well, with that, I want to thank you all for watching and have a great rest of the evening. Love is the law. Love under will.